Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live astronomy program. My name is Justin. I'm one of the astronomers here at the Science Museum, and I'm happy to be with you today. If you've watched previous episodes, welcome back. And if you're just joining us for the first time, glad to have you on board today. You don't have to know about our previous shows to enjoy today's, but if you do want to go back and check out the back catalog, they're all archived right here on Facebook in the video section, and we've got them going up on YouTube as well, so you can watch them there. Now, for today's show, we are going to reference some previous episodes, kind of revisit some stories we've already talked about, but at the end of today's show, you'll be all up to speed. You don't need to know those previous broadcasts. A couple of notes before we begin. As always, need to thank our sponsors for this series, Allianz Partners. Happy to have them on board. For today's show, we're also using the same kind of software that we use up in the dome here at the museum. It's planetarium software called Digistar 7. That's the version we'll be using today, and it can do some pretty cool stuff. So I recommend watching this video full screen if you can. If you got a nice big monitor, you might be able to see a few details that are harder to see in a smaller window. All right, so let's start the show. I think that's all you need to know. So we're going to dive in today with, regular feature that we have up in the dome. Had to do a very special episode today. We talk about the solar system a lot here on the show. And of course, we've got our one star, the sun. We've got the 8 major planets. Out beyond Neptune, we've got a bunch of the icy dwarf planets and some other smaller objects in the Kuiper Belt. But if you've seen any of these previous shows, you know that I'm pretty fond of these smaller objects in the solar system. And I would tell you about all of them if I could, but I've only got a few minutes today. So here's one story in the 69th installment of my ongoing series, Better Know an Asteroid. Today, the asteroid Arecibo. Arecibo is an asteroid in the main asteroid belt, so the outer part of the belt. It's thought to be a part of a collisional family named the Themis family. A larger object suffered a collision, got broken to bits billions of years ago. Arecibo is one of the smaller pieces left over from this collision. It's about 20 kilometers in diameter, and I can give that to you in a sense that maybe makes a little more sense to you. Here's the Earth. We're going to fly in right over Richmond, and there are the largest objects in the asteroid belt, Ceres, Vesta, and Pallas, virtually tied for second. And a little green circle is the asteroid Arecibo. So not all that large. Its namesake looms a little bit larger over the field of astronomy. Arecibo, the asteroid, of course, named after Arecibo, the observatory in Puerto Rico. So that is where we are traveling now. Arecibo Observatory, it's an amazing place, and I was lucky enough to visit it back in March before I kind of had to start staying at home. And here's one of my pictures of Arecibo from earlier this year in March. Just to prove that it is one of my pictures, there's a snapshot as well of me and Prabir, a frequent collaborator here at the museum, one of my co-hosts for some of the shows we do in the dome. But here are some more recent images of the Arecibo Observatory. In August, one of the cables that holds that suspended platform in the center above the dish snapped, damaging the reflecting dish on its giant radio antenna. Then earlier this month, a second cable attached to the same tower failed. And just yesterday, the National Science Foundation that owns the observatory announced that it wasn't safe for engineering crews and repair crews to actually try and fix the observatory. So instead, they're going to move towards decommissioning that main radio telescope at the Arecibo Observatory. Not really great news for astronomy or Puerto Rico, really, or for the Earth. One of Arecibo's big jobs is characterizing near-Earth asteroids shortly after their discovery. Here you're seeing the orbits of roughly 1,000 asteroids that Arecibo has observed over the last 4 or 5 decades. It got started in the mid-70s. Now, Arecibo doesn't discover these asteroids, but it does take crucial observations, often soon after an asteroid's discovery. It really helps us nail down the asteroid's size and its orbit around the Earth to let us know whether it poses a threat for our planet or not. So the decommissioning of the Arecibo Observatory does leave a bit of a void for astronomers. And it'd be good to replace that capability, and hopefully I'll be able to tell you some good news on that front in future editions of Better Know an Asteroid. Now, that was news that just broke yesterday. I already had some asteroid content planned for your show. So don't let those small objects out of your mind just yet. But the next couple of stories are at least good to indifferent news. So let's check out another asteroid. This one takes us closer to the Earth, and this was all pre-programmed before yesterday's Arecibo news. So another reminder, a little better known asteroid tidbit here. Now, if you watched some of our previous shows a few months ago, I think this may have also been in August, there's an asteroid that got pretty close to the Earth, its path shown in orange there. And at the time, that was the closest known approach by an asteroid that didn't hit us. That is until last Friday. Yeah, Friday the 13th, an asteroid named 2020 VT4 got just a little bit closer to the Earth, and this is now the record holder for the closest known non-impact, the nearest miss, I guess you could say. Now, this little asteroid would not have caused any damage if it had hit the Earth. We know it's only 5 to 10 meters in diameter, pretty tiny, would have burned up in the atmosphere. But kind of interesting here, this asteroid passed just a couple hundred miles, a few hundred kilometers above the surface of the Earth. So that's pretty similar to the altitude at which we find a lot of our low Earth orbit satellites, like the International Space Station, orbits at about the same altitude there. Of course, everything I'm showing you now kind of out of scale. The satellites are very small. The asteroid was pretty small. So the asteroid passed by safely, didn't hit the Earth, didn't hit any of our satellites either. But, you know, when one comes that close, it's a good reminder that we should keep an eye on them. Bigger asteroids could certainly have an impact on the Earth, both literally and metaphorically. So in this case, since the asteroid didn't actually hit the Earth, it didn't have any direct impact on our lives, I thought it might be more interesting instead to look at the impact the Earth had on the asteroid. So let's take a look at its path through space. We're going to back up here just a little bit. The orbits of the planets around the sun. And up until last Friday, the asteroid followed a path that looked like that. So it actually went farther away from the sun than Mars does at its greatest distance, and then approached the orbit of the Earth. And they got a little too close last week, and now that is the orbit of the asteroid. So the Earth is so much larger than these little rocks that it really is able to influence their path around the sun. So we don't just have to look out for asteroids, they've got to look out for the Earth as well. And we've got one more asteroid to take a quick look at. I alluded to this a while back. I was doing a recap show in late September, and I mentioned that the Earth had temporarily captured a little asteroid moon. It was discovered last Valentine's Day. Well, a couple of months ago, another little object was spotted headed our way, and it was going to approach at such a distance and at a low enough speed that the Earth would capture it into orbit as well. And this object did get an asteroid designation. In those kind of license plate numbers, it's called 2020 SO, but now that astronomers have had some time to think about it, many think that it could actually be the upper stage of an old rocket. Centaur rocket stage that may have been used to send a spacecraft to the moon in 1966. We should get a better look at the asteroid in early December. It makes a pretty close approach by the Earth on December 1st. And as it makes that close approach, maybe able to get enough details to find out if it is covered in the same kind of paint and other material those rocket stages were coated in. So we may have another temporary asteroid moon, but we may have just recaptured a little bit of our space junk. So stay tuned for updates on 2020 SO as well. Now, one big story that we need to update came to us just a few weeks ago. This one involved another planet, the planet Venus. Now, Venus, not a whole lot like the Earth. Wouldn't be a very pleasant place to live, at least not for us. And yet, recently, a team announced they had detected an unusual gas in the atmosphere of Venus. It's a gas named phosphine. Now, there are some natural processes that can create phosphine, but they thought they had found it at a level that couldn't easily be explained by these natural processes. You can also have living organisms generating phosphine. And so one possible explanation for the detection they made was some kind of exotic microbe living in the atmosphere of Venus. Now, that was a pretty wild explanation and a pretty exciting story if true. So it certainly got a lot of attention when it was first announced. And not all scientists were convinced, but some of the pushback from scientists didn't get quite as much attention as the initial news release. And yet, if you watch, publications where scientific discourse usually takes place, there have been some rebuttals, some reanalysis of the original data, and even that original team has gone back to their data and said, you may actually be right. There may have been some things we could have done better. So if you really watch the story carefully, we can kind of follow as science happens in real time. Some of these eureka moments aren't exactly right away. Now, what the original discovery team is now saying, we made some adjustments to our analysis. We still see that signal of phosphine, but it's at a much lower level than we originally thought. So could this now be explained naturally? Is it just some kind of geology on Venus that is creating this gas? Well, maybe, but there's still some uncertainty here. What can we do to clear up this story a little bit? Well, just like the original discovery team went back to take a closer look at their data, we should keep studying Venus. We should see if anybody else can detect the gas, maybe different instruments, maybe keep observing it over a longer period of time, see if the level of gas is changing as we go through time. So it's a lot of possibilities here, and one interesting possibility is actually a spacecraft that is already in space. There is a joint European-Japanese mission on its way to Mercury named Bepi-Colombo. But to help it get to Mercury, Bepi-Colombo is flying by Venus a couple of times. In fact, it did it just last month. This is a little replay of where Bepi-Colombo was in the middle of October. So we got pretty close to Venus, and there are instruments aboard this spacecraft that could detect the phosphine gas. But if it's at such low levels at this distance, detection would be kind of tough to pull off. Luckily, at the end of next summer, Bepi-Colombo gets even closer to Venus, so it's got another chance to either confirm or refute this possibility. And of course, perhaps future spacecraft or observations from the Earth here could certainly give us some more details as well. So still very much a developing story. Stay tuned for all the latest on Venus. All right, a little more recently, if you watched the show just a couple of weeks ago, I let you know that a pretty exciting launch was going to be taking place from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and indeed it did take place last Sunday. The SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, the Crew Dragon capsule up on top, carried 4 astronauts from the surface of the Earth up to the International Space Station. This was the first operational flight of the Crew Dragon spacecraft. And a crew of 4 helps bring the complement of astronauts on the space station up to 7. I'm going to do even more science on the space station. So it's pretty exciting. A night launch, which is always pretty spectacular. And then, in case you missed it, late in the evening, on, it would have been Monday, a little more than 24 hours after launch. The Crew Dragon spacecraft actually arrived at the International Space Station. This is real footage from the docking late on Monday for us here on the East Coast. And then a little after 1 a.m. on Tuesday morning, they actually opened the hatches between the two spacecraft. The Crew Dragon astronauts actually joined the crew on the International Space Station. Now, all 7 of them make up Expedition 64 on the International Space Station. They'll be up there for the next 6 months before another crew is ready to replace them next spring. So we should have a nice snapshot of all 7 current International Space Station crew members right there for you. So, successful mission so far. I'll have those with astronauts coming back in May. So stay tuned for more on that story as it develops. Now, that was a pretty exciting launch, but I've also got another exciting launch to tell you about. Hopefully I can give you good news about this one in a couple of weeks. Let me just get the space station out of the way here a little bit so that we can see the next graphic. Here are all kinds of interesting space events coming up in the near future. I want to draw your attention to November 24th. And I've seen some reports of this event actually taking place on Monday as well. That may just be a time zone discrepancy, but keep an eye on space headlines for the launch of a mission to the moon. There's a robotic mission. It's China's next mission to the moon, and if successful, it will return lunar samples, rocks from the surface of the moon, back to the Earth. That hasn't happened since a Russian robotic mission did that in the late 70s. So that'll be pretty exciting. That's the next big launch I have to tell you about. So watch for that next week. I've got just one more thing to share with you today. And in terms of flashing back to a previous episode, well, maybe the second one I did over the summer. We talked about the gas giants. I showed you some of the moons of Jupiter. Then a little bit later, we talked about some volcanoes in space, talked about this particular moon, Europa, during that episode as well. But just in the last couple of weeks, another unique possibility, unique feature of Europa may have been revealed. Some scientists were doing experiments in their labs. They were looking at the way some of the salts that we think might be present on the surface of an ocean world like this might react with the high radiation environment here in orbit around Jupiter. And what they discovered is that, well, it's possible that radiation in orbit around Jupiter here could cause those salts to glow in the dark. The nighttime side of Europa may be glowing. If human astronauts flew out here, they may be able to see it. May look something sort of like this. Now, it's a possibility. If the right salts are present, they could react to the radiation in this way. And that'll be pretty spectacular, a glow-in-the-dark moon. Now, how could we find out if that's really happening? We've got a spacecraft in orbit around Jupiter right now, Juno, but its instruments aren't well equipped to observe this, and it doesn't really get that close to Europa, at least not yet. There's some possibilities in its extended mission here, but there is a future mission that is on the way. It's a spacecraft named Europa Clipper. It's scheduled to launch in the next 5 to 8 years now, as its launch isn't specifically set on the calendar yet. But as its name suggests, Europa Clipper is targeting Europa specifically, and its instruments hopefully will be able to detect this glow if it is there. I think it's a pretty exciting possibility, so I hope it does happen, and I hope Europa Clipper is able to detect it. But no matter what it sees, this is another exciting mission to keep an eye on, but a few years out from this launch. But keep your ear to the ground for more updates on Europa Clipper, and maybe we'll see if Jupiter has a glow in the dark moon. Even if it doesn't, head outside tonight. If it's clear where you are, you'll be able to see Jupiter in the nighttime sky. It's paired with Saturn these days, a nice sight low in the southwest. Our own moon won't be too far away in tonight's sky. Keep an eye out for Mars high in the southeast as well. That's all I've got for you today. Just those few news stories, but some pretty exciting developments happening all around our solar system. I'll keep watching the space news, and I'll be back with you in a couple of weeks, hopefully with more exciting updates and more things to keep an eye on. Until then, I hope you're able to stay safe out there, enjoy the weekend, enjoy the next couple of weeks. I won't see you before then, so have a nice Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next time.